So the question is in terms of meditation, and I'll read out just for the recording purposes the passage that Gayatri is questioning and comment as we go along. So when by the previous preparations, now we have to understand what are the previous preparations. There are 8 steps that we have to go through. And when we talk about meditation, we cannot jump to that because it's only step number 7 of 8 steps. So what are the preceding steps? There has to be an element of moral discipline. And that means that the meditation process doesn't start with sitting. The meditation process starts in what I call your waking life. And that means that you have to have a very different perspective. You have to shift your perspective on how you look at life. Now, what science helps us in this, and that is why it's interesting and very apt to study a little bit of science. This, after all, is described by Swami Vivekananda as the science of religion. Can religion be a science? Well, yes, because if you follow step-by-step processes and procedures from credible authorities, coupled with inference, coupled with testability, and the testability will be all these steps. So naturally, these steps are there to help you in meditation because meditation requires a process whereby you clarify the mind. We have to understand what the mind means. You can see that it is a kind of field or an area that can be observed. We all do it. Right now, whether you know it or not, if you pay careful attention, 2 things are happening. One thing is you're listening to me. Secondly, you may be reasoning out what I say. But another thing is happening. There's a self-awareness about it. There is somebody that is perceiving it and looking on. Without that onlooker, we can't observe and we cannot change. If you feel that your stumbling block is all your on the habit level, all your old habits and difficulties of the past, all accumulated to produce a spontaneous reaction to any circumstance that may or may not work, this is because you have cultivated a habit level. And on this habit level, we have to change by introducing different waves. The whole of life is seen as waves. This is not only a modern physics observation, but it also is the observation of the philosophies of old. They understood very clearly things are not what they seem. That is why the key prayer, which is Asato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Jyoti Gamaya, Amritam Gamaya, Mrityo Gamaya, lead us from the death to immortality. The last one, lead us from the mortal to the immortal. So, death to immortality, the real to the unreal to the real, the darkness to the light. So, mortality means death. From death to life, essentially, is what it's saying. But we're very much alive. How can you describe us as death? Machara Amritam Kamaya, lead us from death to life or to immortality. How can it be? We are very much alive. Well, I hope we are, but most people are dead to the reality, and most people are dead to the truth that lies behind these waves. It doesn't look like waves. But if we take the human body, for example, it is largely space. There are something like, 10 to the 30 or 10 to 40 atoms in the whole universe. And the rest, most of it is space, emptiness. If we take the whole of the humanity, 8 billion people, and crush them all, condense them all into the size of an apple, we can easily do that if we remove all the space in between. But it doesn't look like this. Theoretically, if the wall is primarily space and my body is primarily space, I should be able to walk through it. Well, atoms do this at the very tiniest level. At the quantum level, they do it. No obstacle is great enough to act as a barrier for the subatomic particles. It's a remarkable thing. And more remarkable is we don't know why. We have no reason to understand why it works. We just know it works. And the principles of it can be applied. So when we shift our attitude, how will we shift it? We have to find a cause, a reason for not doing any harm to anybody else. Be good, don't kill anybody, but there must be a reason. Love your neighbor as yourself, but why? Surely, if it serves you better to do harm to your neighbor, we should do it. That's utilitarian or consequentialist position. Well, there's a reason, and the reason is that there's a totality. We don't see it like that. When you do harm to another, you're doing it to the totality, and that means you. You're doing it to yourself. That's a very pragmatic way of understanding it. But another way is that there's a fundamental reality there, which has a characteristic of beneficence, something that manifests itself as something that is split up, a manifested relative world. And so that is beaming from something which is stable and absolute, which comes in series. It comes as a surge, creating a potential cycle. Then it comes as a cosmic mind. Then it comes as waves. These are well documented. These are the 24, 25, 26 principles of Sankhya. We have to take it seriously. When we take these tanmatras, these waves or oscillations, that maybe we can trace at the quantum level, not understanding their characteristics, we can see them as waves of divine grace. That is a sufficient shift in our perspective to build up an unconscious bank balance that will serve us well. With this result in mind, that all the things that bind us, all the things that disable our sense of freedom, give us a sense of slavery and a frustration how to get out of it, enjoying moments alone of happiness, but mostly a painful existence. I'll deviate a little bit because today, of course, is Buddha's birthday. And he was mostly concerned with this aspect, that life is essentially painful. Now you may say, what a pessimist, but I would say what a realist, because the result of all your activities really is to fill in some gaps, to fill in desires, to make you happy on the basis that you're not happy. If you were happy, you wouldn't pursue happiness. And so pain is a very serious difficulty for us on the physical level, on the mental, psychological level, on the emotional level. We're all suffering. And so this suffering is theologically, in the Christian view, put as original sin, but it's actually original wound. So we have to go through some steps. We have to go through at least 5 moral steps, that is called yama. We also have to go through 5 morally refined observances. And as we proceed, we start by clarifying the waves in the mind. We start promoting noble waves, which serve to neutralize ignoble waves. What do we mean by ignoble waves? Waves that are characterized by selfishness. And selfishness is driven by the misunderstanding, I am the body, I'm the mind, I'm not the one that's observing it and capable of changing it. It's a big trap. This we call egoism. And unless we are able to combat that, then we cannot really proceed very far. So the first 2 steps are aimed at doing that. Refining the mind, creating some stability for it. Gradually stilling the mind or stilling the waves in the mind. And after we've done that, then of course there are practical steps designed for sitting, designed for formal meditation. So asana, pranayama, and so on. All of these are there. And then ultimately, when all of that is done, then we have the opportunity now to stabilize the mind and steer it. What should we steer toward? This is what is being addressed. So when by these previous preparations, it becomes strong and controlled, first of all, what we are all suffering from is weakness. What is ignorance? It's only weakness. It is succumbing to the external world of objects. That can frighten us, can tempt us, can allow us to doubt, but overall create some instability in the mind. So one effect of these preparations is the mind becomes strong. In other words, the will becomes strong. The mind then is considered to be something like an instrument. That instrument toward which we can proceed in stabilizing the mental field. And once we are fully stabilized, then the truth will reveal itself by itself. So a man called Gautama Siddhartha can sit down with a little preparation and with a little struggle and with a concentration and ultimately meditation come across a revelation, so that a man becomes a Buddha, that is, somebody of enlightened intellect. So it is strong and it is controlled. It no longer goes off here and there and creates misery for us. No. So you can see strength and control brings along a sense of mental contentment and has the power of finer perception. In other words, it has the penetrating capacity to examine the superficial waves that are so concrete for us and see the finer perceptions. So for example, let's take a flower. A flower, we can take it superficially. In fact, we can ignore the flower. I passed a flower many times, so what? We can see collective flowers, a group of flowers, and not pay much attention to them, since our mind is occupied with many other difficulties. But then, once we smell the scent of the flower, once we appreciate the flower, once we take time to examine the flower, there will immediately be some finer perceptions. I will be able to smell something. Now all the senses are designed to pick up all the impressions from the external world, but when the eyes close, when the ears shut down, finer perceptions are there because the senses are still awake. So these finer perceptions, the yogi understands different sense, understands different sounds, understands different things, forms. And the mind should be employed in meditation. Once this happens, and we are ready, and the mind is aware and is ready for finer perceptions, then we are ready for meditation. Then he says this meditation must begin with gross objects. Why must it? It's because as soon as you close your eyes, something comes in, a duplicate of all the forms and sensations that you had when the eyes were open and the ears were open. So you start with a gross object. I mentioned a flower. Let's take a flower, for example, and then slowly rise to finer and finer until it becomes objectless. What it means is the flower isn't just a flower. Actually, the mind with its finer perceptions will now start seeing it in its finer form, as subtle waves. These are called tanmatras. And ultimately, it becomes objectless because all these forms merge into formlessness. So the mind should first be employed in perceiving the external causes of sensations. You sit and you see there's a flower in front of you. Then you can monitor how the mind or the mental field is picturing the form of the flower and is making a kind of investigation or analysis on this flower. And so, should first be employed in perceiving the external causes of sensations. What are the causes? What are the internal causes? What are my responses? And then the internal motions of your own mind and also of the object. And then the reaction that the mind has. All these can be observed. And when it is succeeded in perceiving or observing the external causes of things, of the sensations by themselves, the mind will acquire the power of perceiving all the fine material existences, all fine bodies and forms. We have to understand once more and remind ourselves of these 24, 25, 26 structures. First, we start off with the gross world. We can also call it the waking world. And there are 16 components there. There are all the objects that we perceive, 5 of them. We can't see anymore because we are restricted. We're restricted by the confines of our instrumentality, eyes, ears, etc., nose, etc., smell, touch, taste. And therefore there are these 5 senses that bring information in, present them to the mind. In fact, the indriyas, these particular sense organs, are part of the mind. So let's put the mind as an item, 5 objects as an item, 5 organs of information, 5 organs of reaction, making a total of 16. Now we can draw a kind of line there. This is our world. We abandon this world when our eyes close in sleep. But then we go to another world, and there we might have some finer perceptions. 5 tanmatras are there available to us. And also all egos, all sense of individuality. And these are increasingly less fine as they evolve, as they combine and recombine and present themselves. Unhelpfully, they are called ether, wind, fire, water, or air, I should say, water, and earth, all these 5 things. Starting off from Akasha, very, very fine, also unmanifest, undistinguished from anything else. And then from there, we see that there is a kinetic version of it, a kinetic aspect of it, something that is spread everywhere and active like the wind, Vayu we call it. And the result of that kinetic activity is radiation. That's called fire. And the result of that will be some liquidity called water. And the result of that will be the earth, what we might call magnetism. So these are realities about our world, relative realities no doubt, which are the finer waves behind the other things that we see. And when we investigate this, we're doing a grander job than modern science itself. They have no idea what these things are. And when it can succeed in perceiving the motions inside by themselves, see the flower, start off as a flower, then we found that it was a combination of these subtle elements, these waves, and then we were able to perceive them directly. We were able to perceive that the mind itself, the mechanism, is also comprised of these things. We were able to observe the reactions in the mind. When we can see all these motions by themselves, then when we see them, when we know them, knowledge means control. We gain the control. We gain the control of the instrument in which there are waves. And we already have described 5 kinds of waves which are there, that we call the mental field, and otherwise called the mind stuff or chitta, a kind of field of waves extracted from the general and made into a whirlpool of the particular. So, in itself or in others, even before they have translated themselves into physical energy, it's not just a flower, it is a combination of all of these things. But where is it coming from? It's coming from a cosmic mind. When we see these before they condense, as it were, into physical energy, and when we will be able to perceive the mental reaction by itself, then the practitioner, that's you and me, the yogi, will acquire the knowledge of everything, as every sensible object and every thought is a result of this reaction. In other words, the world in which we live is as a result of our reaction of the waves, subtle as it is, of the mind. And then we will have seen the very foundations of the mind, and it will be under one's perfect control. Different powers will come to the yogi. That's true, but Buddha shewed them, Ramakrishna shewed them. And if he yields to the temptation of any one of these, the road to the further progress will be barred. What power is really there? Well, you'll see, you'll be able to see things in advance of them happening, a kind of prophetic vision. You may be able to have sense, smells. Your body itself may radiate a certain scent. You may well be able to see different lights and forms, subtle things, subtle objects. You may be able to hear certain sounds. You may be able to hear the communications of nature. You may be able to have command over gravity itself. You may well be able to walk through walls, outrageous as it sounds, and you may well be able to make the body light or heavy as you will. These are some of the things, but then what's the purpose of it? It has no purpose, and it becomes an obstacle for you if you become tempted by it. Such is the evil of running after enjoyments. But if he is strong enough to reject even these miraculous powers, he will attain to the goal of yoga, the complete suppression of the waves in the ocean of the mind. The problem is the mind erupts in different waves, uncontrolled, largely speaking, and the whole process, all the steps up to this, will be designed to calm the waves of the mind. What will be the effect of this? When the ocean has no waves in it, then you'll be able to see the reality. The reality sits underneath, always there, never coming, never going. Then the glory of the soul, undisturbed by the distractions of the mind or motions of the body, will shine in its full effulgence, and the yogi will find himself as he is, and as he always was, the essence of knowledge, the immortal, the all-pervading. The Enneagram and Essence of Truth that we do is designed to assist this process. And what do we find? We can find that at the end of the day, there is this mask that we have, made up purely of waves and misunderstandings of our identity. Then what is this samadhi? Because the whole chapter is on dhyana, meditation, and samadhi. Well, samadhi is the property of every human being, he says. Nay, every animal, from the lowest animal to the highest divine being or angel. Sometime or other, each one will have to come to that state. And then alone, will real religion begin for that person. What is religion in this definition? Realization. Not rituals, not books, not dogmas, not doctrines, none of these that can be helpful in constructing scaffolding. So real religion, then alone will real religion begin for that person. Until then, we only struggle towards that stage. There's no difference now between us and those who have no religion, because we have no experience. The famous example of Ramakrishna, you see. Some people have heard about milk, some people have seen milk, but others have tasted it. Only those who have tasted it really understand what it is. What is concentration good for? Safe to bring us to this experience. Each one of the steps to attain samadhi has been, which is the the eighth, samadhi has been reasoned out, properly adjusted, scientifically organized, and when faithfully practiced will surely lead us to the desired end. Then will all sorrows cease, all miseries vanish, because these are in the wave system. The seeds for actions will be burned. We're no longer compelled to do actions, and the soul will be free forever. Now, this means, therefore, that the goal is freedom. The goal is not a post-mortem condition called heaven. It is not necessarily even happiness here. It is simply removing the cause of our difficulties. Coming back to the significance of today, Buddha did this very well in a very simple way. He proposed that we are suffering, that there was a cause to the suffering, that it was a desire for fulfillment where we feel that we are somehow empty. And then, of course, there is a way, there is a method. That method he postulated as the Eightfold Path. What is the Eightfold Path? It is exactly this calming of the waves of the mind. Calming any wave that accompanies any physical activity, any mental activity. Most people are under stress of some kind because they react, and the react is habitual, and they have no control over it. So control your mind. It is the mind which is everything. It's the mind which gives you difficulty, and it's the mind that gives you a way for freedom as well. So there's no difference now between us and those who have no religion. Many times you'll see arguments in modern day, arguments between atheists and theists going on terminally forever and ever, and not coming to any conclusion, because each side is as dogmatic as the other, with no evidence. What is the evidence? You only find it within yourself. The only direct, absolute evidence, the only proof is subjective proof of your own. But you have to follow the steps. What is the alternative? The alternative is to remain in a status quo that doesn't change, which means your situation doesn't change. To react, secondly, to the challenges, if you want to put it that way, of so-called life. If you take it as a challenge, if you take it as a difficulty, a struggle, or you take it as a sport, take it as a game, a shift in mental attitude does it. Understanding these are waves, divine waves, and these waves will come and these waves will go. And we can't wonder where they went. More waves will come, unless we identify with the very foundation. Now, the other thing is, this is to do with evolution. That evolution means an unfolding. Who you are, what you are, is unfolding and will culminate in realization for every single atom, ultimately. This is the hopeful and optimistic aspect of this. Of course, in the beginning, it's a struggle. Why is it a struggle? Because habits die hard. I haven't used the example, and I saw it once, of people who were wearing some kind of upper garment, some kind of covering, like a jersey or a jacket or something like that. They called it winter. And they were asked to consider, if they took this piece of clothing off, which arm would they take out first? Please do it. They took the jacket off. Maybe it was the left arm first and the right arm later. All right, now put it on as you would normally put on. Maybe it was the right arm in first and then the left arm. Let's say. Now, do the opposite. Take out the right arm instead of the left arm and put the left arm back. Do the complete opposite. So once that is done, you see people struggling. They find a clumsiness and awkwardness about it. Why? Because they're in the habit. The habit is developed by a repetition of things, and in the mental field a repetition of the same mistakes, because our view to start with is mistaken. We look at something and it is not what it seems. Let's go back to the example of the flower. Beautiful, everybody admires flowers. It's an easy example. But now we could easily look at something that is a cockroach or something that is a spider. Many people have phobias of these two things. Can you do the same thing? Can you work your way back? Can you go into a state of what is called devolution and go back in the process to the starting point where the whole thing evolved from? So how do we get this evolution? We get it by an insertion of restricting faculties. Let's say time and space and causation, and the absolute doesn't become anything. The absolute that you discover through this process is always there, and it is a fullness. But as long as we see the relative world, we can never see the absolute. And as long as we see the absolute, the relative world disappears for us. How is it possible then to get the best of both worlds? Well, it's possible to shift between the two. You see, when you go to sleep at night, you have a dress rehearsal for death and you go into the deep sleep, dreamless sleep. You have vacated your whole personality, your whole life. It's gone in a closet somewhere. And in the morning, waking up, I had a peaceful sleep. The peace aspect of it you recall, because you're not that. And so that never changes. So we can only say that this is what we call life is just an apparitional thing. Can we be persuaded about it? Probably not. There we have to use our imagination. Image making is the faculty that we have. And when we select a gross object to meditate on to start with, we are image making. And by examining that image and investigating it as it is more really in its finer state, then we get a different perspective on it. See, there's an exercise that you can easily do. You can take any object, any one you like. You can handle it nicely. You can look at it. You can ask it questions, even if it's a pen. What do you want from me? What do you expect from me? It'll reveal something about you. But it'll give you a further appreciation for the object. Is it just, if it's a pen, is it just plastic with an ink filling in? Or is it something more than that? Well, let's take the plastic. Where does the plastic come from? Its causal origins will be in the depths of the earth. It'll be in petroleum. We bypass the manufacturing process, mass production, churning out from molds of plastic, and we see the plasticity of the plastic in its kind of semi-fluid condition. And where is it coming from? It's coming from a petroleum product, a petroleum source inside the ground. And where is that coming from? So you can go along a causal train until finally you get to, it is waves, it is forces, it is energies. And beyond the energies, what is it? We come to a conclusion. These energies vacillate and they change and they oscillate until they become more and more subtle, more fine, hardly being able to perceive them. Same thing with the mind, hardly able to perceive anything. So by the time it comes to meditation proper, the seventh step, there is only one thought in the mind. It is all the finer perceptions have been resolved to one thing, one source, one causal essence. And then when that itself goes, then we have attained the highest. Now, people are frightened by this because they suspect that sounds like self-annihilation. We don't like that. So there has to be a philosophy behind it. It's not self-annihilation. It's not emptiness or void. It's fullness, complete fullness. It's not the absence of something. It's the discovery of something, the revelation of something. And so we can get closer and closer to that. Now, if we practice meditation, we may get it sometimes for a split second, a sense of pure being. And it is only because we have reduced more and more. We have gone from the gross to the finer. We've gone the finer to the causal. We've gone from the causal. Now the Upanishads put it like that, you see, that we go inwards, that the senses resolve themselves in the mind, and the senses resolve themselves in energy, and energy resolves itself in the mind, and the mind resolves itself in the intellect, and the intellect resolves itself back into bliss, and bliss resolves itself back into oneness. This is the meditation process, taking a journey inward to discover the inwardness of things, including yourself. So I hope that makes some kind of sense to you.
Yes, Swamiji. Thank you.
Good, good. Well, we have some time for some other questions. We have 10 minutes left. So I'm happy to take any other questions you may have. I really don't know what the population of Nigeria is these days, so don't ask that question.
Swami, I don't know if this is a very sensible question, but does it become more powerful if more people...
Is that your question? Whether it's
no,
or not?
it's just beginning now. Does it become a more powerful phenomena when masses of people get into that position and into that very deep place of meditation? Does that shift the energy of the world in a sense?
Well, yes, it would do. It would do. See, don't forget, but naturally, if you're all on the same page, aiming for the same thing, yes. The only thing is, prayer should not have a result in mind. There's the trap. And I remember, I think I've told you this many times, the 2-week Enneagram. So on the first weekend, that's fine. The second weekend, and then how are you 2 weeks away? Well, we had a prayer meeting in Johannesburg for rain, and it was terrible. Why would it be terrible? She said, I was disgusted, totally disgusted. I was appalled. Well, you were praying for rain. Everybody's in the same mood. That seems very good. No, you don't understand. I'm absolutely astonished that not even one person brought an umbrella. So what is the key to prayer? No expectation. The key to prayer is an attitude that says already accomplished. And prayer really is listening. Prayer is this attunement. What is the difference between prayer and meditation? The very little difference in the inner world of it, in the inner realm of it. So we don't ask for something. We, with great faith, assume that all is well. And by tuning into the source that provides everything and for everyone, the totality, then we are getting the best for everyone. Like the farmer who didn't have any rain in his field, he prayed for rain, and in the heavenly realms they got his email. Please give me the rain. So their storehouse in the heavens gave him all the rain and flooded his crops, made a flood everywhere. He should have said, may everyone have rain. And leave it there, like posting a letter. Leave it there. It will happen, of course. Why should it happen? Because the source of abundance I'm tuned into. I'm tuned into that already. Jesus puts it in a funny way. You ask the Father for a piece of bread, he won't give you a stone, and I can add that will break your teeth. You're not that kind of entity. So we have to have an element of faith. If everyone has faith at the same time, and mobilizes their mental forces. Yes, of course. Because all of this is to do with prana. All of this is to do with energy. Every mental movement is a psychic prana, a movement of energy. Swami Vivekananda has that chapter, psychic prana. If you control prana, that means universal energy. You've controlled everything. So yes, there's every good for collective mental movements. Yeah, it's not a silly question. Yeah.
Thank you, Swami.
See, supposing we all had a selfless attitude, supposing we had a life that was dedicated to the welfare of all beings, then from a practical point of view, would there be any wars? Would there be any domestic difficulties? No, none of these would be there.
I suppose I do have a question, but I appreciate that we are on a short time. So there's something that I've been wrestling with recently, and it's along the lines of becoming. And I suppose the question is, when we are on the path to becoming, how important is it, do you think, to walk forwards, and how important is it to walk backwards and maybe try to shed some of the weight or baggage that we've gained along that path?
So when you say becoming, what do you mean by that?
I think it's a bit of a vague definition, but the path to becoming your higher self or your best self.
So you see, we never become anything, because it's a contradiction in terms. If your nature is what is termed as a kind of higher self, then that is your nature. You don't become that. It's like saying, when will I become a human? No, you're that already, as far as we are aware on a certain level. So when will we attain, well, as again, this struggle of words, difficulty in language, but let's use it anyway. When will we attain our own Buddhahood? Since it's Buddha's birthday, we'll use that. And then you see, that's a starting point which is erroneous. It might be useful as a starting point. But you see, we are thinking in a linear way. We begin here and we end up here. And that's a little bit of a difficulty. That would be so in any other kind of achievement that we do. In secular achievement, that would be a good way of looking at it. But in spirituality, you cannot become the totality. Already you're that. And so it is to realize what is there already. And so what are we doing? We're removing all the layers that are in the way, that are obscuring it, just in the same way as we see the sun when the clouds move on. It's not that we have to become the sun, or the sun has to become itself, or any of these things. There's a BBC broadcast which is sending waves out, and we are catching it with a radio transistor. You can't ask, when the transistor breaks down, what will happen to the BBC broadcast waves. The grace of the BBC is always flowing. And we have a duplicate, exact copy of it at our transistor. So we cannot become something that we already are. It is to realize that more and more, and to identify then the various layers that are covering this, and remove them systematically one by one. So the most difficult layer will be selfishness, identifying with a psychophysical entity, which actually is a fleeting thing and comes and goes. And the going is called death, and the coming is called rebirth, and so it goes on. It's not a linear process, it's a cyclical process. So can we believe in evolution and totality at the same time? No. So it's a bit like asking, if I'm a cave person, a caveman, and I want to discover what is the sun, and I sit in my cave with a stopwatch and a pen, and don't ask me where they came from, it's only a story. and I observe, okay, let's say 5 o'clock the sun rises, and I record the birth of the sun and track its progress across the sky and diligently monitor over time its change. At midday, it's at its peak, and then it's going down. Well, at midday in Africa anyway, not in this part of the world. This part of the world is probably about 3 o'clock or something in the afternoon as summer goes on. But ultimately, 9 o'clock, let's say, in this present weather, Mr. Sun died. Let's go into the inner bowels of the cave and discuss where will he reincarnate. Well, the sun was never born. It was never a teenager. It was never got old. It never diminished. It never died. It's never reborn. It's just our view of it. So our view has to change. Our view has to change. We have to see all these fragments in front of us as part of a totality. And then we have to see, oh, there's only the totality. That's a progressive exercise. Does it help to look back on psychological baggage? Not at all. Because it's something we cannot change. We can change here, we can change now. As a result, we can change the future, but we cannot change the past. Nor can we be anxious about the future. We have to invest in the present moment. The blank check, it's never been used. Put something useful in. So build up that positive way of thinking, positive idea. And ultimately, we realize our essence as being, away from becoming. Now that's a systematic process, and that's what we study. The practical philosophy of it, the practical steps of it are loosely called yoga. But yoga is not standing on your head or somebody else's head. Yoga is something very different. Yoga is the acknowledgement of the possibility of a union with what we already are. It is the disunion from the attachment to pain. And this is not my definitions, these are all contained in the Bhagavad Gita. So what we mean by yoga is union. And mystic union is what we discover at the end of it. But of course we can use the language of separation for the time being. It's okay.
That's great. Thank you.
All good. Well, we finish off like that. Enjoy the rest of your day. If it's sunny where you are, that's grand because it's sunny here. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Thanks.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you, Swamiji.